What is all this tech?
It's just for a mobile game. Pedometer.
On a sweltering Tuesday morning in August, the sun beat down relentlessly on the asphalt of the PetroGo station on Oak Haven Boulevard. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the pumps, distorting the horizon and fraying tempers. But for federal agent Kyle Vance, the heat was just background noise. Vance was a man who lived his life in a state of perpetual vigilance. As a 10-year veteran of the Department of Homeland Security's Enforcement Division, specifically tasked with immigration compliance, he saw the world through a filter of suspicion. To him, a suburban gas station wasn't just a place to refuel, it was a potential nexus of illegal activity. Vance sat in his unmarked gray sedan, the air conditioning blasting, watching the world through tinted windows. Beside him was Agent Elena Rostova, a younger officer who had transferred to the unit 6 months ago. She was still learning the ropes, still trying to calibrate her instincts to match Vance's certainty. They were there because of a phone call. An anonymous tip had come into the field office that morning. A vague, almost useless report about a suspicious male frequenting this location, possibly involved in labor trafficking or undocumented work. The tip had no name, no license plate, and no actionable details. In a perfect world, or even a competent one, such a tip would be filed away for further verification. But Vance didn't operate in a perfect world. He operated in a world where he believed his gut was more accurate than any database. At 10:14 a.m., a dark blue Chevrolet Silverado pulled into the station. The truck was clean, well-maintained, the kind of vehicle owned by a man who took pride in his possessions. The driver stepped out. He was a tall, broad-shouldered black man wearing a plain white t-shirt, cargo shorts, and sunglasses. He moved with a distinct, fluid grace, the kind of efficiency that comes from years of physical discipline. To most people, he looked like a guy stopping for gas on his way to a barbecue. To Agent Vance, however, he looked like a target. Vance's eyes narrowed. He didn't see a citizen. He saw a profile. He saw a man who didn't fit his mental image of the neighborhood, despite the fact that Oak Haven was a diverse middle-class suburb. Vance turned to Rostova. "That's him," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Rostova frowned, looking at the man. "Based on what? He's just pumping gas." "Trust me," Vance said, opening his door. "I know a suspect when I see one." Before we dive into the catastrophic chain of events that Vance just initiated, I want to welcome you to the channel. We tell stories here about the moments when authority clashes with reality and the heavy price paid when power is abused. Where are you listening from today? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe that justice should be blind, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the ending of this one. The man at the pump was named Julian Thorne, and Agent Vance could not have been more wrong about who he was. Julian Thorne was not an undocumented worker. He was not a trafficker. He was a master sergeant in the United States Army Special Forces, a Green Beret with 14 years of service. He had deployed 4 times to combat zones that most people couldn't find on a map. He had a Silver Star for gallantry in action, awarded after he held a defensive perimeter alone for 3 hours while his team evacuated wounded civilians. He had a Purple Heart from a sniper's bullet that had shattered his shoulder in Syria. But Thorne wasn't just a soldier. In his civilian life, during the times he wasn't deployed, he served as a detective sergeant with the Capital City Police Department. He was a specialist in the Major Crimes Unit, a man who spent his days hunting actual predators. He knew the law because he enforced it. He knew the Constitution because he had sworn 2 separate oaths to defend it, one as a soldier, one as an officer. That morning, Julian was tired. He had just come off a double shift at the precinct, working a homicide case that had finally broken wide open at 3 a.m. He was running on caffeine and the promise of seeing his wife, Maya, and their 2 kids, Leo and Sophie. He lived 4 miles from this gas station. This was his neighborhood. This was his home. As he stood by the pump, watching the numbers tick up, Julian's situational awareness, honed in the mountains of Afghanistan, pinged. He felt eyes on him. He didn't turn immediately. He used the reflection in the pump's glass display. He saw the gray sedan. He saw the 2 figures approaching, one male, aggressive posture, hand near his belt, one female, trailing slightly, looking hesitant. Julian didn't panic. He analyzed. Law enforcement or threat? The tactical vest said law enforcement. The body language said threat. He calmly took his phone out of his pocket. With a subtle tap, he activated an app connected to his truck's internal dash camera. He also tapped the record button on the phone itself, sliding it into his chest pocket with the lens facing out. He was now recording on 2 devices, Plus, the gas station had a robust security system, 10 4K cameras that covered every inch of the lot. Julian knew the owner, a man named Mr. Patel. He knew the cameras worked. 3 angles, 3 truths, and Agent Vance was walking right into all of them. Vance approached with the swagger of a man who has never been told no. He didn't wave. He didn't introduce himself. He walked straight into Julian's personal space, violating the unspoken social contract of the gas station. "State your business," Vance barked. "I need to see proof of citizenship and identification right now." Julian didn't flinch. He slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that had seen things Vance could only imagine in his nightmares. "Good morning, officer," Julian said, his voice a low, controlled baritone. "Am I being detained?" Vance blinked. He hated that question. It was the question of someone who knew their rights. "I asked you a question," Vance countered, stepping closer. "I am a federal agent. I have reason to believe you are in this country illegally. Show me your papers." "What reason?" Julian asked calmly. "What is your reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime? I am pumping gas in my own truck. Is that a crime?" "We have reports," Vance lied. "Suspicious activity matching your description." "My description?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "A black man in a t-shirt. That's your description?" "Don't get smart with me," Vance snapped. His hand moved closer to his holster. "You are obstructing a federal investigation. Now, either you produce documentation proving you are a citizen, or I'm taking you in." "I don't have to show you anything," Julian said, planting his feet. "I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I am a veteran of the United States Army. And unless you can articulate a crime, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." "I don't care where you say you were born," Vance sneered. "Anyone can say that. Prove it." "I have my police identification in the truck," Julian said, nodding toward the cab. "I am a detective with the Capital City Police. My badge is in the console." Vance laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. You expect me to believe you're a cop? You look like a day laborer." That was the moment. The mask slipped. It wasn't about the tip. It wasn't about the law. It was about Vance's bias. He couldn't conceive that the man standing in front of him was his equal, let alone his superior, in training and experience. Rostova stepped forward. "Sir," she said, her voice softer, "if you have ID, it would clear this up." I offered to show him my credentials, Julian said, looking at Rostova. He refused to look. He wants immigration papers. I don't carry a birth certificate to buy unleaded. "Last warning!" Vance shouted, causing a woman at the next pump to gasp and drop her squeegee. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "You are making a mistake," Julian said. His voice dropped an octave. It was the voice of command. "I am a master sergeant in the Special Forces. I am a sworn police officer. If you put hands on me without cause, you are ending your career." "Resisting!" Vance yelled for the benefit of the cameras he didn't realize were capturing his lies. He lunged. Vance grabbed Julian's arm, attempting a control hold. It was sloppy. Julian could have broken Vance's wrist in 3 places before the agent realized what happened, but Julian knew the game. If he fought back, he would be the aggressor. If he defended himself, he would be the violent suspect. So Julian did the hardest thing a warrior can do. He submitted. He allowed Vance to spin him around. He allowed the cold steel of the handcuffs to bite into his wrists. He allowed this man, who wasn't fit to shine his boots, to march him across the asphalt like a criminal. "You're under arrest for obstruction and failure to comply," Vance announced. "I am not resisting," Julian said clearly for the audio recording. "I am complying under duress. This is an unlawful arrest." As they walked toward the gray sedan, the gas station manager, Mr. Patel, came running out. "Hey, what are you doing?" Patel shouted. "That's Mr. Thorne. He's a customer. He's a detective." "Back off," Vance screamed, pointing a finger at Patel. "Federal business. Unless you want to go to jail too. Get inside." Patel stopped, shocked, but he didn't go inside. He pulled out his phone and started recording too. Now there were 4 angles. Vance shoved Julian into the back of the sedan. The door slammed shut, sealing Julian in the stale air of the vehicle. He sat there, handcuffed, staring at the back of Vance's head. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. He was memorizing badge numbers. He was noting the time, 10:22 a.m. He was preparing for war, but this war wouldn't be fought with rifles in the desert. It would be fought with evidence in a courtroom. We are witnessing a textbook example of confirmation bias, seeing what you expect to see, regardless of the truth. Vance looked at a hero and saw a criminal because he couldn't look past his own prejudice. Have you ever been judged by someone who refused to see who you really were? Tell us your story in the comments. And if you think Julian is about to turn the tables, hit like. The drive to the federal holding facility took 20 minutes. For 20 minutes, Vance lectured Julian from the front seat about respecting authority and learning his place. Julian said nothing. He stared out the window, his mind a steel trap. When they arrived at the field office, Vance marched Julian into the processing area. He was triumphant. He thought he had caught a big fish, maybe a gang leader using a fake identity. "Book him," Vance told the desk sergeant, a tired-looking man named Officer Miller. "Obstruction, refusal to ID, suspected illegal entry." Miller looked at Julian. He looked at the handcuffs. Then he looked closer. "Wait a minute," Miller said. "I know you." Julian nodded. "Hello, Frank. How's the wife?" Miller's jaw dropped. "Julian, what the hell is going on?" Vance paused. "You know this guy? Know him?" Miller stood up. "This is Julian Thorne. He's the lead detective on the task force we worked with last month. He's a cop, Vance." The color drained from Vance's face. It happened slowly, like a tide going out. He looked at Julian. He looked at the day laborer clothes. Then he looked at Rostova, who was already on her computer terminal. "Sir," Rostova said, her voice trembling, "I just ran his prints. He's in the system twice, once as NYPD, once as DOD. He has a top-secret clearance, sir." Vance swallowed hard. The silence in the room was deafening. The hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like a roar. "Uncuff him," Miller barked at Vance. "Right now." Vance fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Julian rubbed his wrists, the red marks stark against his skin. "I told you," Julian said softly. "I told you exactly who I was. You chose not to listen." I was just doing my job." Vance stammered. "You fit the description." "What description, Vance?" Julian asked, stepping into the agent's personal space. "There was no description. You saw a black man in a truck and you decided I didn't belong. That's not a description. That's a prejudice." The field director, a stern woman named Director Holloway, stormed out of her office. She had heard the commotion. "What is happening here?" she demanded. "Your agent just arrested a decorated police officer and Special Forces veteran for pumping gas," Julian said, turning to her. "And he did it on camera. Multiple cameras." Holloway looked at Vance. She saw the fear in his eyes. She knew instantly that a disaster had just walked through her door. "Mr. Thorne," Holloway said, switching to damage control mode, "I am so sorry. This is clearly a misunderstanding. We can release you immediately. We'll expunge the record. No harm done, right?" Julian laughed. It was a cold, hard sound. "No harm done." Julian held up his wrists. "You kidnapped me. You assaulted me. You violated my civil rights in front of my neighbors. You think you can just say, 'Oops,' and I walk away?" "We can discuss a settlement," Holloway suggested quietly. "We can make this right." "I don't want your money," Julian said. "I want his badge." He pointed at Vance. "And I want the truth on the record." Julian walked out of the facility 10 minutes later. He didn't take a ride from them. He called his wife. When Maya arrived, she was terrified, then furious. Julian held her, calming her down just as he had calmed himself. "What are we going to do?" Maya asked as they drove away. "We're going to fight," Julian said. "We're going to make sure he never does this to anyone else." The legal battle that followed was not a skirmish. It was a siege. Julian hired one of the best civil rights attorneys in the state, a woman named Alicia Sterling, who had a reputation for shredding government overreach. They filed a lawsuit in federal district court. Thorne versus United States, Vance, and Rostova. The complaint was 60 pages long. It detailed every violation: Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizure; Fifth Amendment, due process; false arrest, assault, battery, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The government tried to play hardball. They filed motions to dismiss. They claimed qualified immunity, the legal doctrine that often protects officers from liability unless they violate clearly established rights. They argued that Vance made an honest mistake in the heat of the moment. But they had a problem: the video. During discovery, Sterling obtained the footage from the gas station. She obtained Julian's dash cam video. She obtained Julian's cell phone audio. She synced them all together into a seamless timeline of incompetence. The jury saw Vance approaching aggressively. They heard Julian politely identifying himself. They heard Vance's dismissal. "You look like a day laborer." They heard the manager screaming that Julian was a detective. But the most damning piece of evidence was Vance's own history. Sterling dug into his personnel file. It wasn't clean. Vance had 8 prior complaints of racial profiling. 8. Every single one had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unsubstantiated. There was a pattern. Vance targeted minority men in affluent neighborhoods. He used the badge to enforce his own version of demographics, and the agency had let him do it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day. Veterans groups showed up in uniform to support Julian. Police unions, usually protective of their own, stood with Julian because he was blue too. Vance was isolated. When Vance took the stand, he crumbled. Under cross-examination, he couldn't explain why he ignored Julian's offer to show police credentials. He couldn't explain what the suspicious activity was. I had a feeling. Vance mumbled. A feeling, Sterling asked. Is a feeling probable cause, Agent Vance? Is a feeling enough to strip a man of his freedom? No, Vance whispered. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was a thunderclap. They found Vance and the government liable on all counts. They awarded Julian Thorne $16.5 million in damages. It was one of the largest individual civil rights settlements in the district's history. $8 million was for compensatory damages, pain, suffering, reputational harm. The rest was punitive, punishment for the agency's failure to supervise a rogue agent. But the money was just the beginning. The judge, furious at what he had seen, took an unusual step. He referred the case to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division for criminal review. Agent Vance was fired 3 days after the verdict, but his troubles didn't end there. 6 months later, he was indicted by a federal grand jury for deprivation of rights under color of law. He eventually pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge to avoid prison time, but he was permanently barred from ever holding a law enforcement job again. He lost his pension. He lost his career. Rostova, the junior agent, testified against Vance. She kept her job, but was retrained and transferred to a desk unit where she processed paperwork, far away from the street. She had learned a hard lesson about complicity. Director Holloway was forced into early retirement. The agency implemented a sweeping new policy, the Thorne Protocol. It required agents to have verified independent corroboration before detaining individuals based on anonymous tips. It required mandatory de-escalation training, and it required agents to acknowledge and verify any credentials offered by a subject immediately. 2 years later, Julian Thorne is standing in a park. It's a beautiful autumn day. He is throwing a football with his son, Leo. His shoulder still aches sometimes when the weather changes, a reminder of Syria, and now a reminder of the handcuffs. He isn't a detective anymore. He retired from the force a year after the trial. The settlement meant he didn't have to work. But more than that, the job had lost its shine. He couldn't wear the badge without remembering how easily it could be tarnished. Instead, Julian started a foundation, the Guardian Legal Defense Fund. It uses the settlement money to provide top-tier legal representation for veterans and first responders who have been victims of civil rights abuses. He spends his days fighting for others, using his resources to level the playing field. He watches Leo catch the ball. He smiles. "Good catch, son," Julian calls out. A police cruiser rolls slowly past the park. The officer inside waves. Julian waves back. It's a reflex. But his eyes are different now. They are watchful. He knows that the system is fragile. He knows that rights are not self-executing. They must be defended, sometimes in a courtroom, sometimes at a gas pump. He walks over to his truck, the same blue Silverado. He opens the door and checks the dash cam. It's recording. It's always recording. Julian learned that truth is the only weapon that never jams. And he keeps his powder dry. This story is a stark reminder that even those who serve are not immune to the biases of the system they uphold. Julian Thorne had every credential, every privilege of rank, and it almost wasn't enough. It makes you wonder what happens to the man who isn't a detective? What happens to the woman who isn't a veteran? If this story made you angry, good. Anger is the fuel for change. But don't just be angry. Be prepared, know your rights, record your interactions, and never assume that authority is automatically correct. What would you have done in Julian's shoes? Would you have kept your cool? Would you have taken the settlement? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories where the underdog bites back, make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, stay safe and keep your cameras rolling.